Okay. All right. So live streaming connect. So I'm gonna start the recording in just a moment, and then go right into the show. Okay.
All right.
Ready?
Mm-hmm. Wait, no, I'm not. Yes.
Good afternoon and welcome to The Way to Wow, People Making Money. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm very glad to be here this afternoon. Very, very glad that you have joined us. I have lined up for you an absolutely spectacular guest. This is a relatively new friend of mine, but I feel like she's become my sister in the time that we've known her. She is sage, she is successful, and so we're going to be talking to Robyn in just a couple of minutes. As is my practice, I do want to mention the show from last week. So I did the show on my own. I talked for about an hour on how we can develop relationships that will propel our professional life forward. Showed you how to use LinkedIn and how to use Twitter and even Instagram to do that. Two different techniques. So if you're looking to take your professional life, whether it's as an employee or as a business owner, to the next level, I encourage you to take a look at that show. Go to the Way to Wow channel on YouTube. You can watch the recording of it. And as I mentioned, I think at the beginning of the show, really the quality of our lives is the quality of our relationships. And so again, I encourage you to take a look at that. If you have any questions, comments, always grab me on social media, shoot me an email. Happy to respond and help you however I can. So that was last week. And this week, my guest is Robyn Mattison. And, I just realized you spell Robyn the same way my younger sister spells Robyn, R-O-B-Y-N. Robyn and I met a few months ago now, and she has really become one of my mentors. I'm very, very happy to say I have learned a tremendous amount from her already, including in the 10 minutes getting ready for this show. She gave me a couple of pointers on something that I'm working on, in this case, in my personal life, absolutely invaluable. And so, Robyn, thank you very much. Welcome to The Way to Wow, People Making Money.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah. Great. Well, listen, so I'm just going to give you one sort of data point about Robyn. She's the CEO of the advisory board. This is an organization that is dedicated to helping us put together a group of people who we can interact with on a regular basis and can help us see a better path forward in our professional lives. And so that's something that Robyn and I are talking about. But Robyn, I want to start really at the very beginning of your professional journey, which you were mentioning to me earlier this week, was when you were, just a young girl. So this is, it reminds me a little bit about my daughter, who's been talking about starting businesses, already for six years, I think. So tell us, I believe you said you were 6 years old when you started your first business?
Not my first business, but I did start working with entrepreneurs when I was 6 years old. I come from an entrepreneurial family, and I have a grandmother who owned her own salon, was one of the early women who brought hair extensions to LA. My father has had a dental practice. A family of doctors who had their own practice. So I always worked. I worked from an early age. I answered the phones. And when I was spending my summers with my grandmother, the phone's in my dad's office. So I had a phone voice at 6, 7, 8. It was really fun. I love pushing the buttons and practicing my writing on the pad. But my grandmother would keep me some summers during summer camp time. And I would actually loom hair extensions before you could buy them from China, wherever you get them now. It was a handmade process. So I've been working literally my whole life.
Yeah. So do you remember any anything in particular about those early years, working in those early years, that really stands out as something that, has been a part of your professional life ever since?
Well, everyone was in a service related industry. So early on, the idea of customer service really kind of stood out for me. As a young person, it just felt like helping. My dad is also a minister, and I remember the story of the Good Samaritan. I remember I wanted to be that Good Samaritan, and I saw them through their entrepreneurialism as being, in my childlike mind, a Good Samaritan. So I feel like that giving back really has been my through line. And when I started working in service, I've had so many jobs. When I started professional working, my first professional job was a manager of a restaurant in Nashville. And again, my goal was to be quality driven. I used to tease that I learned everything I know about TQM, which is no longer a relevant term anymore, but quality management and human resources from working in a restaurant. Because if you can manage high-end wait staff, you can manage everything, and if you can handle restaurant customers and make them satisfied, then you know how to deliver quality.
Absolutely. Especially when people are hungry, they're often cranky. So if you can keep them happy during that time, that's a great skill.
I carried that through the nonprofit career and into my corporate career.
So let's kind of move forward now a little bit out of your childhood years, maybe into your teen years and through schooling, leading up to college. What was that experience like? How did that form you, or form the professional side of Robyn?
Well, by the time I was a teenager, I made my way into the salon. My grandmother also was a trainer. She could train cosmetologists, so she would have me in the salon helping blow dry hair and do things like that. I worked often in the church, so the idea of giving back and staying, having goals and tasks and delivering service to people was something that was really important to me. But as a teenager, I was a teenager. They didn't make us the way they make teens now. Teens now are great. They're volunteer. They're world driven. It was the '80s, and so we had a whole different teen experience. But I always knew that I think working and living and growing up in an entrepreneurial environment gave me leadership skills and executive functioning skills that I didn't even know that I had really until I started my work life. The ability to give direction and get direction, and the benefit of clear communication was something that was very deeply instilled in me as a young person.
Okay.
Particularly to get what I want.
Well, they say, children are natural negotiators, right? But it sounds like you really took it to, another level, because you were having to negotiate both in the sort of the personal and the professional environment from a very early age.
And it worked in high school. In high school, I was one of those individuals who would, in California, in Los Angeles, you could take high school classes during the summer school classes ahead. So by the time I was a senior, I had taken most of the classes that I really needed to graduate. So I just had a couple of credits I needed. I was able to negotiate with the principal that my theater class second semester counted for English, for honors English. It was an honors class.
Wow.
And it was an honors English class. And so I was able to negotiate that with the principal so he could see very clearly it's listed under English. And so I shouldn't have to take whatever else you wanted me to take. And it was great. My last semester, I had 2 classes, madrigals and honors theater.
Interesting. So, oh shoot, I had my next question and now it went away.
So
Go ahead. Yeah.
So then, so I went to college. I worked my way through college. Really, I worked my way through college. And when I came out, I worked as in the restaurant. I also worked as an educator, and I entered into the United Way
Mm.
in Nashville. Went to college in Nashville. Went to double HBCU. Shout out to Fisk University and Tennessee State University. Big shout out for my HBCUs. Yeah. Um, I ended up working at the United Way in Nashville, and it was that was my first kind of step into the nonprofit world. It's also my first opportunity to really work with CEOs, because I was tasked with making calls on behalf of the United Way and working with different leaders in the community. But it the skills, the customer service, and the ability to pay attention to detail and take direction is where I really kind of honed that there at the United Way, and then carried that through.
So, and I recall the question I want to ask you, and this is, I think, particularly relevant for younger viewers. I know when I was growing up, my parents had certain expectations about what my professional life was going to be very clear. Right? You're going to college. You're going to be a professional. I mean, it wasn't the sort of, classically Jewish, doctor, lawyer, accountant. I chose architect, which was a little bit out of the, thing there. But and I've had other guests who have talked about that aspect of their professional lives. So what was the sort of interaction between you and your parents in terms of how you were developing your professional outlook as a young person?
Well, it's funny you ask. I never I really didn't know what I wanted to do, honestly. I had all these skills, but I was raised singing in the church and dancing and performing. I played the flute. I was really raised to be an artist, and so I thought that's what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just wanted me to go to college and get a job. Like, they didn't have, my dad wanted me to go to medical school. He did. My grandmother, I was kind of the blacks. I have a lot of doctors in the family. So I have a feeling that our parents were a lot alike. But they really just wanted me to be happy. And my father wanted me to get a graduate degree. And so I knew that even the undergraduate was not going to be the last stop for me. But even with that, I really had no idea how I would do that.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, I guess, one of those lucky ones. I had enough instilled in me that it really didn't matter where I went. But when I ended up at the United Way, I knew that this helping business people make a difference in their communities was something that was important to me, and something that I could get behind as a career. And so when I started, so that, of course, my dad, when I got that job, my dad said to me, of course, this is a classic dad, "Wait a minute, you mean people are paying you to ask them for money?" She's like, "That's a great job for you." Because I mean, it was like daughter, classic daughter.
So now you're in the the nonprofit world, but dealing with a lot of people in the business world. So what was kind of the next step after that, and what was the motivation to move to leave the United Way and move to your next step?
So I worked through the United Way. I worked at some really great institutions in Nashville. I worked at Meharry Medical College, HBCU Medical College. I worked at I did a lot of nonprofit work, and then I came back home to LA. My goal was I wanted to become an executive director one day of a nonprofit. That was my goal back then, and I thought that I would continue working that route. All along, I was always mentoring executives in the nonprofit and in in for-profit arenas. I was the place where people will call, and my friends and would call, or people refer folks to me. Talk to Robyn. I it it was pretty well known that if you were, in need of career development, that you could come spend some time with me and I would help get you in touch with everyone. I don't know if it's because I knew the right people in the community from my time in nonprofit as a fundraiser, or you know, it, just my personality. But I'm always helping in that space as well. And even today, I have a few clients who I help with career development still. So that's, yeah.
Yeah. So now you're back in Los Angeles. What was the next step?
The next step was corporate life. Somehow I got plucked from nonprofit and pulled into corporate life. I ended up working still in there was still nonprofit tie. I ran the Herbalife Family Foundation. It was a nonprofit that was that it still is, that brings nutrition to children around the world. And they were in the middle of transition, an organization in transition. And so I worked with them to help build. Now, the through line really also in my career is building, because I didn't have the pedigree of Ivy, which is a pretty traditional nonprofit pedigree. Though I did go to a Black Ivy. This is considered Black Ivy, for those who don't know. Okay. And so I was often given the level of job, but with less resources. It was usually poorly neglected institutions, and I always grew them by 200% or more. I mean, big growth, not year over year, obviously, but from one to the other. And so in my corporate life, I was tasked with building this foundation that was giving globally, which is a challenge. There are the real strict, international rules that need to be adhered to, and growing a team, and more so raising the money to support that was important, and working with entrepreneurs. I worked specifically with the Herbalife community to really coach and teach in philanthropy and get them involved and engaged in how to appropriately, select and nurture an organization in their area. It was really what we would do is establish programs in a community, and that community of Herbalife owners would work to support and give legs around it. And we would give the money and they would give the time. And it was a really nice marriage. And I did that for 10 years. When I started there, the budget, I think I had maybe 1.3 million in the bank. And when we left, our assets were at 9 million. When I started, we were funding maybe 20 organizations. And when I left, there were, maybe over 40, but close to 45 organizations. We were supporting over 200,000 children a year. We were supporting a good deal of children around the world and in almost 50 countries. So that was difficult, raising money in 90 countries, figuring out the way how that works, getting the funds there. That was a operational challenge.
And so that's a great lead-in statement. What was the growth process that you went through now? I imagine as much as helping other people to learn and grow, you were having to do that yourself as the organization expanded, as the amount of money you were dealing with expanded. How did you manage your own growth? What were, if you don't mind sharing, even maybe what were a couple of the issues that you had to overcome, if you will, or deal with in a substantial way?
Well, there were two things. One, this was my first corporate job. Remember, I worked in a restaurant, I worked in education, I worked in universities and nonprofits. And so the understanding the corporate environment, though I've been working, talking to CEOs forever. So I had a lens, but I was always on the outside looking in. And I understood a lot of what my leadership donors, my executive donors were facing as an executive. Um, and just kind of learning that corporate dynamic was one thing. And then this was the first time that I worked in a global community. So understanding the diversities of communication style. I was literally traveling the world. I would go to 13 countries per year. And I would start my year in South America, and I would work my way through different regions, the other regions, Asia Pacific and UK. At the time, if you think about it, think about Europe, they've got these incredible tax structures because they're more socialized, and more services for their constituent, for their communities. But because of that, they weren't very philanthropic. The ideology was, well, we're paying all this tax, and so the government will take care of us. But just think about it. When I went to United Way, it was around 2007. And I'm not United Way, Herbalife, it was 2007. And we'd had that global, the last big global kind of, crash, if you would, crisis. And so for the first time, there were communities who felt like, not that might not have been the first time this happened, they felt like that more was needed from the community. And we can't rely on the government. They don't have the wherewithal to manage some of the what's going on, some of the challenges that are going on. So that was an interesting that was an interesting process, just kind of figuring out how I communicate in each region. And and then of course, I had a great team around me. So it was really, they made it very easy for me. But those were the big challenges that, understanding the politics locally, I worked with all lawyers from every country. There were so there was a lot of growth, and then learning to listen, and I think learning to stand my ground. That was something also. That was a tough one, and be okay with that. Be okay with saying no, because in this direct selling environment, the higher up you go, the more special you are, and certainly you should be. You're doing all the work. You're working really hard, and you're building equity in your business. And so, but it put me in a position of telling executives who were more senior than I, this wasn't the right thing to do, because my job was to keep the foundation, the organization sane, right? And so there were rules that needed to be followed that generally were unknown. And so I couldn't expect that they would know. And so being able to do that in a way that didn't just make everybody unhappy. And I did. I ruffled some feathers, I'm sure of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to make everybody happy is almost for sure the best way to make nobody happy, right? So there's always going to be some who can do. So how did being female, being Black, did that have any impact on how you had to deal with these issues? I'm just curious to know that aspect, because obviously your experience would be different than mine, or it could have been different than mine in that respect.
Well, it's funny, because there are times in my career that I'm hugely aware, and then there's times when I'm not, and usually that happens when I get comfortable, and sometimes I forget, because I think people are people. And I was raised in LA. I've got a very diverse group of friends. It's not like I'm so. But yes, I think that certainly my communication style is different, certainly because I'm African American and I was raised in that space. It's also, yeah, I guess I don't interpret things. I interpret things differently. And so there were some times where there were some missteps, and where I might have taken offense and I should not have, or vice versa, because of a communication deficit. I also, I like to call it the superhero effect that happens. This happens a lot of times with African American executives when I'm coaching. I oftentimes warn them of this, and that is, we're taught to work harder. You've heard it. You've been, anyone who's lived through COVID has heard it. Work harder, do better. Couple that with the fact that I'm also dyslexic, ADHD. So I have a disability that I've masked very well, I think, sometimes not so well. And so it made me have to kind of really work a lot harder anyway. And so I would produce and achieve amazing results. I remember my first 6 months at Herbalife, we'd had this huge event, and we were sitting in this meeting, and I had given the report, and the report was that, okay, we collected this amount of dollars. And one of the executives looked at me and said, "You mean you actually collected it?" Because in the past, because of the sensitivity to the celebrity status of some of they weren't even being asked to pay. They would pledge, but no one wanted to make that ask of them. Mm-hmm. Because they didn't want to offend them. But I was too green to know anything better. And so I just made the ask, that's what and it really launched me as a superstar. And so then the expectations are always there. If you come in at this level, then that's your average. And if you've ever been in an annual review, and you have one of those bosses that says, "Well, here's your job, and if you're doing your job, then you're a 3." Right? Right? And so the expectation is, if you set it here, and now that's where we're supposed to hit. If I don't hit here every time, then I'm no longer a 3. I'm somewhere. Right. Luckily, and I didn't have that challenge so much, but it didn't affect me in my reviews, but it did affect me sometimes. The expectations was that I could, leap tall buildings.
For a while, I was a fundraiser for the Los Angeles Jewish Federation, and like you, I was pretty new and green to it. So we would have this long list of people who had made pledges but hadn't paid. And I, coming out of the business world, it's like, well, if I have an unpaid invoice, I got to call the person and say, "Hey, you got to pay," right? And I ruffled quite a number of feathers over that. And finally, somebody pulled me aside and said, "You probably shouldn't call these people." And I said, "But there's something wrong here. They've presumably made a commitment to support the organization, but then, and they get plaudits for doing that, right? But then they don't actually pay the money. So we've got to have an effective way of dealing with this, right?" In my naivete, I was overlooking perhaps some of the more political aspects of it, interpeople political. I mean, not national political. So it's interesting that you I think one of the interesting points of your story is how sometimes not knowing the rules, if you will, can make us more effective, because we see the goal, we see the mission, and we go after it, and we don't let things that might stop other people stop us. So I think that can be a good thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So now you're at Herbalife, and what caused you in the end to move on from Herbalife?
Well, it was, it was time for a change. Really, it was time for a change. I'd been there. The organization had changed. There were leadership changes, and that happens across the board. I was having a life change at the same time, and a couple of things were really important to me. One, I realized that when I started at the United Way, my youngest son was in kindergarten. Now, I have two boys. With my first child, let's want to talk about above and beyond. With my first child, I didn't take a maternity leave. I was pregnant at Planned Parenthood. I gave birth at, not at Planned Parenthood, but while I was working at Planned Parenthood, and didn't take a maternity leave. I was back. That was a Sunday. Wednesday, I was representing Planned Parenthood at the United Way in a meeting at the United Way, the organization I worked at. Right. So I had, and he was on my hip. I didn't get a leave, but the point was he was with me all the time. With my second child, I moved back to LA. I'd gotten this job at the university, and I didn't get that. I took some leave. I did take a leave with him, but I didn't get a lot of time. And he was in kindergarten when I started traveling. So I was traveling. I was gone a lot from kindergarten, and now he was going into high school. And I knew I had these 4 years with him, and whether he liked me or not, of course, he's a teenager. He didn't like me the same as a kindergartner. but I wanted to be present for him. I wanted to be present there, and just to get to see and get to know him better, which is really difficult to anyway with a teenager. But he's, wonderful. They're both boys are great. One's a musician and chef, personal chef, and both are students, college students. And the baby is in New York right now, and NYU. So he's not a baby at all. So I apologize if anyone. He's not going to be listening. So I hope.
There always are babies, isn't that?
Always. I say that. I said, you guys have to grow into men, but you'll always be my babies.
Right. I tell my daughter the same thing. You're growing into a woman, but you'll still be my baby. So.
And honestly, I wanted to start working with businesses and executives. I looked around United Way, and I keep saying United Way, Herbalife, and other corporations that I worked with, and there just weren't a lot of brown and Black executives. So I thought that I would start off with coaching an executive in that space. But found myself working more and more with nonprofits, like the ones I grew up with, dental practices and veterinarian practices, and other small businesses, and helping individuals kind of get up off the ground and stay focused. A lot of times it's just having that sounding board, helping to solve problems. And a lot of individuals people sometimes see a problem and it can stifle them. And a lot of times we see things for other people that we don't see for ourselves. And I'm fortunate in having that kind of vision and just depth of working knowledge to be able to kind of identify some of those gaps, and let's fill them. And I'm not afraid to pick the shovel up.
And so how did that transition from working at Herbalife to coaching small businesses, coaching nonprofits? How did that work? What did you look at in terms of what you needed to do, in terms of creating some kind of structure? What were those issues? How were those issues handled?
Well, difficultly. I mean, it's, going out on your own, it's scary, right? It's very scary when you have to kill what you eat. It's like, like I thought I was a gatherer. Now I'm a hunter. And so I think the biggest challenge is managing your time, and finding the clients, finding good clients, finding people I want to work with. So that was challenging. When I work with a client, I always look at infrastructure first. I always look at kind of that base level. What do you have to work with? What's your mission? I want to know what your mission and your values. I love testing values. I want to know what motivates you, what drives you. And really helping. I like to help business people create, or business owners really create that environment that fits their lifestyle and meets their vision, that it all aligns. There's some sort of alignment there. And luckily for me, I'm super creative, so I can almost always find a way to tie it back. And if it doesn't, I'm gonna tell you it doesn't. You know me, Kevin. You're pretty. I have very little filter, and I'm using all of it for your show.
You don't have to use all of it. I mean, we can bring out the 5-inch guns, if not the 16 inchers, you know? And did you initially connect with the advisory board? Is that more sort of a more recent iteration?
So I was working as a consultant. That's where. I was working as a consultant for about 4 years, and the pandemic hit. And during that time, like everyone else, I was very self-reflective. I also have a compromised immune system, so I was really very much segregated. I didn't take a lot of risk. There are some people who enjoyed the freedom of the LA streets. I was not that person. I was not that person.
I was out walking every day.
Yeah, I stayed in most of the time. I got used to cooking and all the fun things. I made a sourdough dried out. It was growing and now it's dry. But I was looking at my career and what I really wanted to do, and I wanted to. Was looking for franchise opportunities. Really, is what I was looking for. Mm-hmm. I looked back on my career to see what was important to me and what I was really good at. And building is something that I've always been really good at. Being able to take a census of the lay of the land, which is important. Asking the questions of the key stakeholders, which is important, and taking that data and turning it into gold. Mining that and turning into gold. And that's what I really was looking for. So when I found the alternative board, it just made sense. And the idea behind the alternative board is that, the stories, it's really a great story of how it was founded. The owner, the founder and owner, had a business that he had grown and he was going to take it public. But to take it public, he needed a board of directors. And once he had gotten that in place in order to take it public, he had an aha moment. He thought, wouldn't it have been great to have these insights of diverse, non-competitive executives to give me this advice while I was growing this one? So he founded a new organization, the Alternative Board, and it's a franchise and new here in the LA area, relatively new in the LA area. But the idea is that 4 to 10 business executives sitting around the table once a month, holding each other accountable, giving shared knowledge, asking questions, and holding our feet to the fire. And in between that, working one-on-one, facilitated by me, and in between that, working one-on-one with each of those members. To make sure that they have the resources to stay on task, to meet their goals, that they are honoring and are ready for the next board meeting, are ready to present out and meet the challenge ahead. And so it's about, for me, I like to call it a monthly business retreat. But for me, it's really about supporting the business community. And the reason why I chose, which is really goes back to that altruism, which really is a driving force for me, is that giving back. And that's what feels good to me, being able to help support and strengthen the business community, really at the owner level, because owners are people, and your life is personal, and your business is personal, and it affects every part of your life. If you're not managing your time well, that affects your personal life, and then if your personal life then affects your business life. And so and that's how I came to the Alternative Board.
And so that kind of completes your professional arc. So I want to sort of do a quick review of where we've been and pull out some of the ideas that you've discussed. So the first one that really struck me was this idea that in the end, customer service and maybe even business on a broader scale is really just about helping. I think that's really a fascinating insight. I have a friend, she was actually a guest on the show a couple of weeks ago, who does a customer service Twitter thing once a week. And I've got to put her on to this idea. I've never heard that before, but I think in the end, that's it, right? If I'm in business, I'm in the business of helping people, whether it's helping them with a product or helping them with a service. If I have that helping outlook, that to use your example, the Good Samaritan outlook, then people are going to want to patronize my business. And if they don't think I'm going to help them, then why in the Lord's name would they want to have anything to do with me, right? I mean, isn't that kind of fundamental?
Yeah, unless, of course, I mean, but people are driven by different things. So that's what drives me. And I agree. I think that but at the end of the day, I'm also trying to drive profits as well. And whatever is important to you. With my customers, with my clients, it's whatever is important in your world. If money is what it is, then let's get those sales up. Let's figure out what's that roadblock that's keeping you from getting your product to market and to the next level. If you're on the other end and you want to change your lifestyle, you want to move from the kind of work you're now to a simpler, retirement lifestyle, if you would, or a simpler lifestyle, then let's figure out, how do we move you? What can you delegate? What pieces do we need to put in place to ensure that you're still receiving the income that you need, but your quality of life has changed, and you're getting that quality of life. So it really, and that's the beauty of the alternative board and having kind of that diverse, not the niche. My niche is business owners. My niche isn't a business type. And so because of that, I get to work with just incredible people, and I learn so much. And it reminds me a lot of I lean on a lot of the skills that I had when I was working actually at Cal State LA in their development office. And there would be different professors with different projects that we would go after major gifts where I had to learn about hydrogen fuel cells, which was something in crime labs and all of those that are now up on the Cal State LA campus. And so it's great because I get that opportunity to learn the mechanics of your business so that I can help you, and I don't need to go deep, but so I can help you move in a direction that makes sense. I think it's the executive functioning skills that are I'm leaning on heavily.
I think this is another connection point we have, because when I had my real estate company, I always told people the hardest thing for me to find is a good client. So once I had a client kind of, in the fold, it was much easier to then figure out, well, what is the next thing they need, rather than to go find another building to manage or another building to appraise, right? Because that's a whole new relationship I have to create, as opposed to building those existing relationships and broadening them. That was the perspective I always had on business. So another thing you mentioned was about how our values should underpin our businesses. I would venture to say, so we're not working out of concert with ourselves. How do we do that investigation? How do we really figure that out?
Well, see, that's tough. That's a tough one. There's a values exercise that I like to do. I have these little cards that have value and then a definition of them, so that we know we're talking about the same thing. Because I can say, if you think about it, let's think about religious, faith, spirituality. A lot of times those three things are tied up or intertwined or used interchangeably. But I will argue that they're three different things. I could be religious and spiritual. I could be non-religious and spiritual. still, I could not believe in an organized religion and still have a very spiritual relationship. And I just say that because I'm a PK and it just makes sense for me. And so so what I do one of the things that one of the exercises I do, and I've done this a lot with, in the foundation world as well, is I have people take a look at a deck of, I don't know, uh, it's about 50 some odd. I've never really counted them. I just have the deck, and identify what's important to them, kind of what drives them, based on the idea of it and the words. And let's pick three top ones, and let's think the three things that don't. And that changes, and it changes throughout our lives, just like we change, our foci change. And so that's how I do it. Like I start there, and then we talk about what part of this is in your business. How is this tied to your business? How are you implementing this in your business?
Interestingly enough, a lot of the people I've talked to on the show, their career path has been somewhat opportunistic, and yours seems to be much more sort of well considered and thought through. So were there kind of serendipitous parts to it that we haven't captured yet, or you
Okay.
feel that for me a little bit?
So serendipity. Okay, so true confession. When I took the job at the United Way, there were two jobs presented to me. One was in resource development, which is fundraising. I did not know that at the time. The other was in community development. I come from a blended family, and one of my moms was in human resources and got to wear a suit every day, and the other mom was a social worker and wore leggings and sweats every day. And I knew I wanted to wear a suit to work every day. Gosh, I was in my 20s. So landing in fundraising was not, landing in nonprofit was not by design. But I was very strategic about, I knew the goals that I wanted to achieve. I knew the financial goals I wanted to achieve. And I knew kind of the business kind of trajectory that I wanted to go on. And I would set goals for myself. I'm a big goal setter. I set goals, and I would say things like, by the time I'm 32, I want to do X, or next year I want to do this. And I had these like 3-year milestones for myself. And even if I missed, say, year one, okay, didn't even if I didn't make that, sorry about that. I thought I put that on do not call. Even if I didn't make that, I would not change my goal. I never changed it. So I just meant I had to work hard, that much more harder, to get to the next level so I can get back on track and make where I want to go. My goal was to be an executive director one day, and I was able to do that. I had a goal of wanting to work in higher ed and at a major gift level, and I was able to do that. But I like doing new things too. I like trying different. So if you look at my career, you put on my LinkedIn, almost every job was just a little different. So serendipity was just being in the right place at the right time. With Herbalife, I was ready. I was ready to go for financial reasons from Cal State LA, because I was the breadwinner of my family, and I wanted more. I wanted my kids in a better school. I didn't want, and I wanted them to be in an independent school. So I thought I need to make more money to do that. I can't. I wanted them to have the lifestyle that I had. I grew up with a dad who's a minister and a doctor, so I had a comfortable lifestyle. So there was very little serendipity, except for that I had applied for jobs. You mentioned being Black. One of my challenges was not so much Black, but I look younger than my age. You know that. So and not sharing with the public. But and so that all, not only was I a brown girl, but I looked like a young brown girl. And I remember in the interview right before the job that I was the top candidate. The hiring professional said she wanted to hire me. And I was, asked by the CEO, and this was it's a local hospital, major hospital here in California. And the CEO asked me, are you okay working with people this age? And I was at the time I was a plan giving officer. So I only have like the median age of my donors were like 72. So I was like, well, and I was really excited for this. I was so excited to this was going to be a kind of a nice little step up, and it didn't happen. I was really very disappointed about that. And I remember the headhunter, a friend, and Diane Netzel, retired Netzel, and associates, said to me, you were great. You were the top candidate, and something good's going to come. And it just happened that she was working with the Herbalife Family Foundation, maybe 6 months to 8 months later, and she said, "I know the right person for you. You need someone who presents well, who can do the fundraising and the grant making, who can build, and I've got that person for you." And that's exactly what I did. And, yeah. So yeah.
I know in the early part of my business, I was very young. When I was, my mid-20s when I started my real estate company, and I'd be, talking to these people about, managing a multi-million-dollar asset. And they're kind of looking at me like, I don't know if I want Doogie House or,
I still get people ask that question. Particularly now, it's like, so I can help you. Like, so twice this has happened to me in the last month. So how old are you? And I've got grown children, so do the math. I'm old enough to have grown children. So however young you want to make me, just make it young enough to be old enough to have those 2 grown children.
I do think that sometimes, these doubts about ourselves, or these doubts about us, come from ourselves. Yeah. I know a lot of my being young in the beginning of my business was really coming from me being so kind of scared about starting a business, and what did I know about, being in a business and all that kind of stuff. So I was probably as much projecting that on other people, as they were, thinking about it themselves, and by doing that, then it would cause them to question it. So Marty, do you have a question for our guest? I'll give you an opportunity to chime in here if you you're still on mute.
You have to unmute, Marty.
Let's see.
Put it in the chat. We'll ask it.
Yeah.
Oh, there he goes. There you are. Hi, Marty.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I feel like that ad. I feel like that ad. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Now that was certainly, is very informative. What a lot to try and absorb. What I would be interested in is, how do you approach people you don't know? You send a letter off first, you knock on their door. How do you try and go about it? LA, there's 10,000 people you could call on. How do you narrow it down? Like my wife and I have and Kevin is on the board, Special Angel, and we bring music to kids, let's say 13 to 18. Some have been into child pornography, prostitution. We ask. I usually don't ask, but my wife asks, how many of you have run away? And everybody raises their hands. So it's that kind of a group, and there could be incarcerated. They could be in a halfway house or home, that kind of thing. How do you raise money, and who would you pinpoint for something like that? If this is in your bailiwick. This is coming from a 76-year-old, so.
You can't guess my age, Marty. I might just be 2 years younger than you.
Listen, I doubt that.
So Marty, so what you're doing, first off, thank you for what you and your wife are doing. I think it's amazing. Bringing music is so important. It heals the soul, it helps the brain. And so what you're doing is important. So first off, if you're not including that bit in your message, I think that's important. I think the first thing before you start calling on individuals is to get your message and make sure your message is clear as to why you're doing what you're doing, why there's a value to these children. So that's the first. The second is, if I were you, since your industry, your music, I would start with people who I believe have a passion for music. Philanthropy is nothing more than connecting people's passions to a cause. I'm passionate about the arts. If you ever called me about something arts related and I had money to give, I would likely consider you as an organization. So do I pick up the phone? Do I call? I do everything. I do what's appropriate for the person. I think that a great way to get your word out in this day and age, which we didn't have, years ago, was social media. Showing what you do is great. If you can somehow put an image to the outcomes that you're producing, if you can show the value of the work that you're doing, that's a great way to engage folks and see what that pulls in. And I would say on LinkedIn, on Instagram, that's just pictures, that's easy peasy. And make sure that you have all of the mechanisms in place for them to get in touch with you and give money the moment they see, the moment they have the urge to give. Because we, particularly in Los Angeles, we can get easily distracted. The moment we move on, we move on. And now we're on to something different. So being able to capture that audience. I don't think that letters are as effective as they used to be. I think if you can do, and they're costly. I remember days of direct mail where we were organizing letters and bins, and that's, then they come back, you pay for the postage, even though you get the nonprofit rate, they come back, you've got to figure out what you're doing with all this extra, you've wasted all your money, time. Those days we don't need those. There are also some really great tools out right now for online giving, that you can set up ways to take donations online, and now you can get money from everywhere. Actually, that was the way I was able to grow the Herbalife Family Foundation. Is I moved away from most of the traditional mechanisms. I held a CFRE for 18 years. That's a certified fundraising executive. It's like being a CPA in the fundraising realm. And so I taught the classes. There's people out there who've taken classes from me in this space. But I wasn't really able to do kind of those best practices because it just didn't make sense in that global community. So, and being online, if you can get it online, that's my recommendation.
Thank you, Marty, for your question. And you know what?
Robyn, one thing, I moved from chairman of the board. One other question, Robyn. I moved from chairman of the board to the chairman of the advisory committee. And what kind of people am I going to be looking for my advisory committee to fill slots? Should I go after accountants, an attorney, different people to fill slots that can be beneficial, to a 501c3?
So you have you do have a board of directors, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So who's on your, well, I'm going to say it depends. Your board of directors is your fiduciary. They have the fiduciary responsibility for your organization. That is, they're the ones that can be sued if all things go to pot. just the easiest way to say it for folks. So what you want on that board you might want something different. You might want, your business people there, your lawyer, your accountant, someone in, to help with your branding. I like to use advisory boards in the nonprofit realm. I like to use them for exposure. I like to use them as someone I get to go to 2 or 3 times a year, someone who's going to put money behind me. And they know that I'm going to ask them for something amazing, and they're going to be able to provide something amazing to me. And that just depends on what kind of amazing I need. So when I'm recruiting for and I have a fiduciary board versus an advisory board, I'm looking for people who can help me open doors. That's what I'm looking for my advisory board, whether it be opening doors to help expand my organization. And really, honestly, if you have a business board, if you have a board of directors, fiduciary board, I think advisory should be fundraising, even though fiduciary is their goal, is their responsibility is fundraising as well. That's part of the fiduciary responsibility. I've said that word way too many times.
Thank you, Robyn. Kevin?
Yeah. Same to you, Kevin. Same question.
Oh, same to me. So, as the new board chairman of Special Angels, so I do look at I have 2 primary responsibilities. One is to make sure that we are taking our fiduciary responsibilities seriously, and we're, all of that is being handled properly. And the second one is to make sure that the resources, particularly the financial resources, are there so that the organization can operate and grow, right? So and I guess I would say I have a third responsibility that anyone in a position of leadership has, I believe, which is to make sure I'm grooming someone to take my place. Because, I'm not going to be there forever. I'm not the right person to be there forever. So, I've got to make sure that there's someone who can step into my shoes, and I need to have that person ready really kind of sooner rather than later. Not that I'm planning on leaving, but, the vicissitudes of life. So I agree with Robyn that on the advisory board side, people who have an interest in supporting the organization, but, they don't want to be involved in the nitty gritty. They don't want to have the liability, and yet they're willing to respond positively to, the big ask. I think that makes a lot of sense in terms of how we, view those 2 different bodies. So there you have it. Well, we're actually.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Robyn.
You're welcome.
So we're over time.
I knew.
Usually, I had a feeling we were going to go over time with Robyn, because she has so many great things to say, and unfortunately, in many ways, we've only scratched. We kind of just took the surface stuff. Having known Robyn now for a few months, there's so much more underneath the surface that we could get into. So I'll have to, drag you back here for another show sometime in the future. But Robyn, thank you so much for coming here and sharing your thoughts, your ideas on how we can advance our professional lives, and the value of having, an advisory board, to support us, help us see the things that oftentimes we don't see. So thank you for that. And I'm just going to quickly wrap things up by saying we are here every Wednesday, 12:30 Pacific time, 3:30 Eastern time. I'll let the Mountain and Central time folks figure it out from there, +1, -1, I guess. And we are here to talk about every week how we can advance our professional lives with guests like Robyn, or as I talk about some of the things that I've learned and written about over the years. So thank you very, very much for joining us. And as I always do, I just want to give you my sign off, and that is, Marie, darling, I think about you all the time. Still my bell. Thank you so much, everyone.
I thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.